So I'm going to start from the top. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our virtual career day series. My name is Josh Walker. I'm an architect with HKS, here to working from my home again, because like you, we're all living and working from home these days. If this is your first time joining us, this is our attempt at HKS to introduce you to one of the largest architecture firms in the world and the many kinds of professionals it takes to make that happen. We design everything from stadiums, skyscrapers, hotels to hospitals, and we have over 1,000 professionals from all industries who make that happen. Architects, accountants, interior designers, engineers, human resources, researchers, and everything in between. There's a place and role for everyone. So far we've talked with, and get ready because this is a list, Sustainability Engineer Mike Brown, Director of Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Giselle Santos Rivera, Architect Adeze Kadeh, Interior Designer Adelia Schlois, Architectural Photographer Daryl Shields, Design Director Dan Flower, and writer Julie Wellick. This week, we've got a behind-the-scenes professional we've been waiting to get to. I'm so excited about this. Senior Design Researcher, Dr. Casey Lindberg. Casey, thanks for joining.
Thanks again.
So I start every one of these interviews out the same way. How did you get interested in, or if you go back to your high school days, what did you think your career would be?
So in high school, I didn't really know exactly what my career would be, but I knew that I was really interested in math and science. So I was a big math nerd, a big science nerd. So that was kind of my frame of mind as I went off to college.
Math and science, okay. And from there, you decided to do what?
So as soon as I got to college as a freshman, I took my first psychology course. And that really opened my eyes up in a way that I started to understand how to apply some of the math and science that I like so much to a more tangible sort of real world application.
Interesting. You say tangible and real world. When I think tangible and real world, I think like chemicals mixing together in a lab or the study of animals, like something practical, but you're talking about psychology as being practical. What about that was attractive to you?
Right. So I think when I say tangible, in this case, I mean something that was more something that I could sort of relate to, that I could understand a little bit more about how I behaved, how others behaved, our different biases, our different histories, how that shaped our behavior. That was really interesting to me rather than something that seemed a little more abstract if it was sort of like a math equation or something.
Okay. So if you loved the maths and sciences and then got drawn to psychology, where did that take you?
So as soon as I took that first course, I kind of had this realization of how I could, the stuff that I learned before and really enjoyed, how I could apply it to this new world that I was learning about. And that led directly for me to the world of research in psychology. And that took me to graduate school where I got my PhD in psychology in a lab that was studying the differences between older adults and younger adults in terms of memory, emotion, using all sorts of different kinds of tools.
Okay. So you spend a lot of time studying, a lot of research, particularly with the older population, and I can see that loosely tying into architecture, but I don't see the jump. How did you get into architectural research?
Right. It was not a clean jump because I didn't know it was going to connect at the time. At the end of my PhD program, I had a little bit of a end of PhD crisis where I knew that I didn't want to do exactly what my advisors were doing, which was writing grants and writing papers all the time. Really important stuff, but not really for me. So again, I had that kind of, how can I do something a little more tangible, a little more applicable to the real world? And I saw a career counselor and they asked me what I wanted to do when I was a kid. And I said I wanted to be an architect. So this was way before high school, something that I'd kind of written off, you know. So I took the advice. I went back to even more school back home in Denver, and I got my Master's of Architecture. And that's where it started to really come together.
Okay, so 7 years of school to be a psychologist, a doctor in psychology, and then you decided to go back to school to become an architect. Were you like the most overqualified individual in your class?
Well, I don't know about overqualified. We all had a variety of backgrounds. It was a program where you had an unrelated undergraduate degree. But it was really fascinating to start seeing a lot of people with similar interests in psychology along that path as well as my career now.
Okay, so you got your Master's of Architecture, and did you then decide that you wanted to be an architect, and are you now an architect?
So right when I got there, to architecture school, my plan was to become an architect, a licensed architect. But soon after I started talking to people, I understood that I was taking for granted a couple things that I had learned and spent quite a bit of my own life understanding. One was scientific literacy, and the other was that people were designing buildings first and foremost for people. A lot of people do, but a lot of people don't. They get into the field for a variety of reasons. So understanding that led me down the path of, okay, I probably am not going to have the most influence or relevance to the field by being a licensed architect, but rather by practicing research in this new world that I love.
Oh, okay. So you put the two and two together. Got it. And so then you decide, after you got out of architecture school, you're like, all right, let's go find an architect crazy enough to hire a researcher.
Well, I was in the world of research then, but a new world of research, design research, right? So I was basically you kind of go where the funding takes you right off the bat. And for me, that happened to be office space stuff. So the General Services Administration funded a postdoc for me, as well as a large research program called Well Built for Well-Being. And it was the first time that we gathered data on the ambient environment with sensors, with spatial conditions, like different kinds of office setups, physiological data through worn body sensors, as well as psychology data just from asking people using surveys how they felt in the moment. So it was the first time all that data came together, and that's really kind of set me off in the direction that I'm still on right now.
Okay, I can see a lot of your passion coming out here for a lot of stuff that's going over my head, and I love it. Just trying to figure out where did you find your niche? Because I know for a lot of designers, we find, the world of design is so extensive, we can't do all of it. So we find kind of our passion. Mine is school design and well-being in school design specifically. But with the world of research available to you and the world of design available to you, where did you decide to settle? Did you find something specific you wanted to focus on?
You're right. It could go in a million different directions. There are a lot of places that need a lot more research, and people with various passions can find those little places. For me, it was about individual differences. So the idea that we're not all the same, that we all have our different development, our own histories, our own biases, our own, we look different, we're different sizes, we're different ages, and all that matters in the context of design. So too often, design happens when you start considering a human, you think of the humans in your design as sort of interchangeable parts. And they're really so different that they're such a dynamic part of the ecosystem that's the building and the person, that's how my passions kind of align there, individual differences.
Interesting. So you're taking the study of individual differences and preferences and then applying that to the study of buildings, which are for the masses, and trying to incorporate design for all elements. That's fascinating. I would love to read more about your research now that we're talking about it. Gosh, especially in schools where you get such a diversity of students and diversity of learners. That's fantastic. So now let's talk about, on that topic of students, let's say a student's watching this right now and is interested in following a career path like yours. Maybe they want to explore some niche area of research to apply to architecture. They don't feel like they're a designer, but they might be good at the sort of critical thinking that you're talking about.
Right.
How does one go into architectural research without going through 13, 10, 12 something years of education to get there? Do you need to be a doctorate in psychology?
Well, I would actually recommend even more school than I had. I'm just kidding. My path was not a clean path. I don't necessarily recommend it, although I enjoyed the path. I think if you already know at the outset of your education that this is where you want to go, there are lots of programs that are growing year by year out there that have concentrations in health and well-being, and those inevitably involve some sort of research or scientific literacy. But what might even be more relevant are people that are already designers, or say you're going to be a designer down the road, and then 10 years down you think, hey, how can I incorporate research a little bit more? And I like to think of it as a little bit of learning a new language. It's a different lens of looking at the world, but it's also like learning a new language. And just like learning a new language, just learning a few things can be incredibly important and meaningful to people that already speak that language. You can think of if you had the chance to go to another country and you know how to say just simple phrases like thank you, I'm sorry, and hello. Those are really meaningful and can get you a long ways. And it's the same thing in the world of research. So just starting to interact with people that might know a little bit more about it, learning that language helps you digest and communicate information from valid sources a lot easier.
Okay, so critical thinking, resource management, or resource um, analysis almost is to verify the validity of what you're talking about. Okay, so
Yeah.
now I want to figure out, we're talking very high level concepts, a lot of really over my head kind of stuff sometimes here. How does your work then translate into the built environment? Do you have an example that you can talk about? Do you have a process that you would work with the designer on? How does your work implement into HKS work?
So there's a lot of examples I could think of, but probably the most meaningful answer is about the process. And we might come into this conversation with different sort of assumptions on where research should live, maybe at the very beginning of a project or the very end, but it can be inserted at any place along that process. You can learn from people in their space before they're in that space, while they're in that space, while they've been in that space for 20 years. And it's all really meaningful information that then feeds the next round of design. So we have our own living labs, which are offices at HKS that have gone through all sorts of different manipulations of HVAC systems and ways that we treat the light. And right now that we're working largely from home, we're learning about how to think about designing new multi-use spaces and what the future of the office looks like and what home office looks like. All sorts of exciting new things that are really founded and based with an understanding of the data that people are giving us on how their experiences are going.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's just kind of a constant feedback cycle.
Exactly, yeah.
You design something, you build it, you study it, you refine it for the next version, and you make it better the next time.
Right, so it's a lot about that cycle. It's about listening to the occupants as well as the buildings themselves, giving you data throughout that whole life cycle, before it's built, after it's built, and after it's been in use for a really long time.
Yeah, and that's honestly, I think that's where the biggest benefit is to having the researchers on the team, because as architects, we jump from one project to the next in the design phase and sometimes in the construction phase, but most of the time it's just design to design to design to design. And it's really nice to have somebody able there then to process information from the later stages of the project and give us feedback on what's working and what's not.
Well, one of the most exciting things at HKS is working with the designers. So as they are interested in being more scientifically literate or more involved in research, they become arms of the team that are really critical in making this happen. Our small team can't make that happen by ourselves. That doesn't make any sense for a model. It's informing and learning with the other designers to help along that process at a much larger scale.
All right. So now last questions before I let you go. What does it take if I wanted to pursue a career like yours to get versed in the literacy and the language of research? Like, what does it take to get good at the kind of research that you do?
So honestly, it's my answer from before. It's really starting to talk to people that you want to emulate or have some skills that you know that you want more of. So just like learning a new language, it's talking to scientists at your school or in whatever program you're at, people, designers within your own firm that may have that skill already, asking them how to get into it. Because you can get to this path through a wide variety of angles. So it's all about learning that sort of foundation of scientific literacy and then applying it.
Okay, so you just gotta, it sounds a little bit like what Daryl Shields, the photographer, told us. You just got to get started. You just got to practice it because it sounds like the kind of skill that comes with familiarity and repetition and just a lot of experience.
It's a really empowering language to speak.
Okay. So then I think that's the end of our series. Yep, we're right at the 15-minute mark. I appreciate everybody for joining us. If this is your first time on this series, we've got 7 more in the past on our Instagram and your YouTube feeds you can go check out. If this seemed like a good fit for you, come learn more about the people that Casey works with on a day-to-day basis. And we'll be right back here, same time next week. Fun fact for next week, we're actually doing a Spanish language interview with the director of the Mexico City office for HKS. I won't be hosting that. I don't speak Spanish. Giselle Santos Rivera, our interviewee from week 2, will be conducting that interview, and we're looking very much forward to their conversation. And or at least I am after someone translates it for me. But remember, you can find this on our story here in a few minutes and our YouTube soon after. And if this is something that you feel very much interested in, you can leave a question or a comment and we'll do our best to get back to you there. In the meantime, thanks everybody. Stay safe. Thanks again, Casey.
Thank you.